Greetings, and welcome to A Year of Movies, a Planet Geek production. For this project, we are using the Ivan Walters reference book of 365 films to watch on the day they happened. Each day, we watch a movie associated with the date we are watching it on.
And as it is the 9th of July, we are going to be watching The Big Red One from 1980, directed by Samuel Fuller and starring Lee Marvin. So the only reason that I am aware of the existence of this movie is because of one of its stars, Mark Hamill, as an early, just post A New Hope, Star Wars movie that he was involved with. Other than that, knowing that it's a war set movie, I had no really any more knowledge of the movie than it's one of the few movies on Mark Hamill's list of movies that I have yet to see. So hence this would be a first viewing for me. And like I'd already mentioned, not only does this movie star both Lee Marvin and Mark Hamill, but it also stars Robert Carradine, Bobby DeCicco, Kelly Ward, and Siegfried Roach. Having previously fought in World War II, an unnamed sergeant, played by Lee Marvin, now leads soldiers of the U.S. 1st Infantry Divisions through World War II. His men include conflicted marksman Private Griff, played by Mark Hamill, pulp novel writer Private Zeb, Robert Carradine, Sicilian Private Vinci, who is Bobby DeCicco, and medic Private Johnson, played by Kelly Ward. The soldiers adapt to the hardships of war as they see conflict in North Africa and Sicily, and take part in the D-Day landing. Also end up liberating a Nazi concentration camp. So of course for this project I've seen plenty of wartime films, stuff that has been between World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and so forth, and everything in between and even prior to. But this one seemed to be a little kind of a different aspect to it. It's more, seems like an episodic telling of the different locations in which World War II that this group of soldiers find themselves in. Now we're dealing with the leading officer of Lee Marvin and the 4 core members who seem to be the only ones that have the good fortune or the luck to survive all these incursions, and each time they have new men added to their roster just to become fodder later on. But again, we jump from situation to situation, and we deal with the feel of like a made-for-TV movie. It's not overly graphic. It's not very violent either. There is a bit of gunplay. There's some really cool pyrotechnics and all that. But the movie actually starts off with, so we enter into this movie through an earlier incursion where the Sergeant Lee Marvin establishes his first appearance in war, which is way back in 1918. And the sequence itself is actually in black and white, making it feel like a completely separate situation. And of course, they do their best to, in the black and white, de-age Lee Marvin, because by the time we jump to his World War II, he's already very gray-haired and whatnot as an older gentleman. So we're just doing a jump of about 20 years, making the 20-year jump in time. It's kind of cool to be seeing just after, basically, I think finishing Corvette Summer is when Mark Hamill goes into this movie, and seeing a pre-Revenge of the Nerds Robert Carradine, which I've seen him in movies prior to that, but it's kind of neat to see a new role with him not playing the character of Lewis is kind of neat in the 80s to begin with. Again, it has a sort of TV production feel. Like the closing credits look very like end of your episodic television that comes up and whatnot. But I mean, it's enjoyable, but again, I don't think it will stand the test of time as like one of the greatest war movies of all time. Well, at least in my opinion. If there are you out there that really enjoy this movie, I apologize. I just didn't see the huge draw other than, seeing babyface Mark Hamill once again. So at one point, when the Allies recapture Tunis, which is during one of the altercations that happens, the squad gets replacements as they engage in a rough bull session with them on July 9th, 1943, the night before the invasion of Sicily, which is about 39 minutes into this 1 hour and 53-minute movie. And as it is the 10th of July, we are going to be watching The Green Mile from 1999, directed by Frank Darabont and starring Tom Hanks. So admittedly, I have to say that unfortunately I did not get to see this movie when it came out in theaters. Of course, at the time I was definitely well aware of the movie coming out and everything involved with it. Not only the fact that it was a Stephen King story, Tom Hanks had a story as well, but just stuff came, I don't even know the circumstances of what had stopped me from seeing it, but I did not actually get to see this movie until it came out on home video. That being said, like I had already mentioned, not only does this movie star Tom Hanks, but it also stars Michael Clarke Duncan, Bonnie Hunt, David Morse, Doug Hutchinson, Sam Rockwell, and James Cromwell. Paul Edgecombe, played by Tom Hanks, the head guard of death row, just wants a life for him, his colleagues, and the condemned to be nice and easy. However, when John Coffey, played by Michael Clarke Duncan, a massive man convicted of brutally killing a pair of young sisters, arrives, things start to get strange. Beyond the simple, naive nature of a deathly fear of dark, Coffey seems to possess a prodigious supernatural gift. Paul begins to question whether Coffey was truly guilty of murdering the two girls. When one goes into making a theatrical interpretation of a Stephen King story, you either want to have like a Carrie or a Misery or The Green Mile as your result. This is a perfect execution of a story that, while everything from the page doesn't show up on the screen, what does is a beautiful tribute to a hauntingly, wonderfully written story. When you bring in an acting cast that is of such high standards as the one that we get in this movie, you are inundated with a fabulous performance and an execution so precisely done that it is a treat to watch. You feel for every single character, whether that is a negative or a positive feeling, which is also perfect for it. The characters that you want to where you feel empathy for are perfectly structured. Those that you have hatred for are so incredibly pulled from the gut of humanity that it's almost impossible to realize how well done these actors pull off these roles. For example, the dual roles of Doug Hutchinson and Sam Rockwell are just like, when those two characters interact, you feel, the best part about it is that you feel sympathy for Percy, who is Doug Hutchinson, when Wild Bill, who is Sam Rockwell, attacks him technically. And it's just like, but then for Hutchison to turn the embarrassment that his character experiences into a darker, more angrier version of his very small character, which is also something that is fantastic about this movie, is filled with very tall actors. So when we have a smaller character, they are diminutive in comparison, especially when you increase the size of an already tall Michael Clarke Duncan to be like towering over actors such as James Cromwell is just a wonderful sight to be seen. And the movie has one of the most horrific deaths portrayed on screen in a legitimate non-horror film. Now, this movie does have elements of horror to it. It has elements of thriller as well, but it's mostly a fantastic drama. But the execution of Michael Jester's character, Edward Delacroix, when what happens to him during an electrical chair execution, which is what happens throughout this movie, is just a horrific scene to witness. And the way that you also have everyone around the situation. Like, it's a live execution. It's part of the process. Those who were wronged by the convicted are there to witness their death. And when it goes horribly wrong and everyone like almost sort of falls apart and realizes we got to keep going. It's something that as soon as I start watching this movie upon a repeat, I'm like, oh, right, I got to sit through that again. But again, not overly graphic, it's just so beautifully executed. And when we see the first execution of one of the prisoners, a bitterbuck played by Graham Greene, we are witness to the process of what happens. And his execution comes on July 10th, 1935, which is about 41 minutes into this 3-hour and 9-minute movie. And as it is the 11th of July, we are going to be watching Chariots of Fire from 1981, directed by Hugh Hudson and starring Ben Cross. So to begin with, I was well aware of this movie according to critics and giving this high praise and all that sort of thing. At the time, it wasn't something that interested me in seeing in the theaters because it was 81 and I was 10, so chances are I wasn't going to see this. But I do believe that I eventually did see this, probably on one of those, like I had mentioned before, those movie networks that we had up in Canada, either First Choice or Super Channel, whichever one of those it was that we were watching. But again, it had been a while since I'd seen this movie. So, and like I had already mentioned, not only does this movie star Ben Cross, but it also stars Ian Charleson, Nicholas Farrell, Nigel Havers, Cheryl Campbell, Alice Cridge, and Ian Holm. In the class-obsessed and religiously divided United Kingdom of the early 1920s, two determined young runners trained for the 1924 Paris Olympics. Eric Liddell, played by Ian Charleson, a devout Christian born to Scottish missionaries in China, sees running as part of his worship to God's glory and refuses to train or compete on the Sabbath. Harold Abrahams, played by Ben Cross, overcomes anti-Semitism and class bias, but neglects his beloved sweetheart Sybil, played by Alice Cridge, in his single-minded quest. Now, upon the watching of it for probably the first time in a very long time, the religious aspects of this movie, which are essential to the core of this movie, played out a lot more in the forefront than I had originally probably conceived of it before. Now, the idea of this being a huge event when it came out theatrically, critically acclaimed, great acting and whatnot, I found it being rather a more dullish movie. I didn't find the draw. I couldn't understand what it was that audiences or critics had seen in this movie when it originally came out. That's not to say that the acting was subpar. We have a great cast and whatnot, and we have some really interesting ways of telling this story, but I think the forwardness of the religious background was a little more than I was expecting upon this watch. I was expecting more of an underdog sort of story, which is, not really my favorite type of story, where these guys train to become professional enough to, amateurly professional enough to join in on the Olympics. And of course, they do have to. They don't automatically start off as the best. They do have to go through it, which is kind of cool. I've seen training montages from the 1920s to figure out how to get these guys into the role that they are. But again, I don't think I had remembered how religious forward the storytelling was. And I mean, the Vangelis soundtrack is fantastic. There's no denying that why this movie was a hit musically with the score. The theme, Chariots of Fire, just synonymous with this movie. But I also found that it was kind of weird because we are talking 81. We're talking late 70s, early 80s when this movie was put together, and how synthetic the actual soundtrack sounded, like very much played through synth completely through, not really big orchestrated music as I would have thought it would have been, but it sounded a lot more modern sounding to the visuals of something set in the 1920s. So when it comes down to the 100-meter heat being held on the Sunday, Liddell has to trade his event with a team member, and he ends up going on to win a gold medal in the 200 meters on July 11th, 1924. which is about an hour and 52 minutes into this 2 hour and 4 minute movie. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that particular season, it actually ended up winning for Best Picture, Best Original Music Score, Best Writing Original Screenplay, and Best Costume Design. Also getting nominated for Best Supporting Actor for Ian Holm, Best Director, Best Film Editing. And as it is the 12th of July, we are going to be watching Bobby Jones, Stroke of Genius from 2004. Directed by Rowdy Harrington and starring James Caviezel. So like I've mentioned before, I'm not the hugest fan of the sports biopic movies, much less golf ones, which I can't really culminate in my brain how many there actually would be. But the cast seemed very interesting, and again, not something that I would have looked for outside of this project itself. So that being said, this is definitely a first viewing for myself. And like I'd already mentioned, not only does this movie star James Caviezel, but it also stars Devon Gerhardt, Claire Forlani, Jeremy Northam, Malcolm McDowell, Aidan Quinn, and John Shepherd. Rising quickly from amateur to legend, Bobby Jones, played by Jim Caviezel, becomes renowned for his intense persona and wins an extraordinary number of tournaments. When it appears that Jones is having problems balancing his golfing career with the rest of his life, he consults his devoted wife Mary, played by Claire Forlani, and must make the difficult decision to stay with the game or retiring. As far as biopics go when related to sports movies, this is a half-decent movie. I do deal with a good portion of the movie centered around his golf routine, but also trying to hack around a story of his life, trying to exist within the world where he has family members that believe it's wrong for him to be doing what he is, while he has great supporters as well. It's filled out with an interesting cast of characters, which makes the movie definitely watchable, and James Caviezel does a very charming portrayal of this gentleman golfer who obviously never becomes more than an amateur at the sport, his own convictions for that reasoning, but he also is very much a gentleman to begin with. It's again not my sort of interest in watching movies with sports biopics. And of course, the reason we're doing biopics is because it's always the same thing. We have some hardship, and then we reach to an increase into a climax where everything's like, yay, he won the big game, or they came from behind, to that sort of thing. And it definitely happens in here, and yay for him, but something that I don't regularly seek out. So as part of the story, the amateur of Bobby Jones tries to win the Grand Slam of the tournament, which is 4 actual golf events in a row. And it's on July 12th, 1930, where he wins the U.S. Open. And where his pal O.P. Keller, played by Malcolm McDowell, it's a reporter who questions the truth of Jones's amateur status. Which happens at about an hour and 49 minutes into this 2-hour movie. And as it is the 13th of July, we are going to be watching The Gangs of New York from 2002, directed by Martin Scorsese and starring Leonardo DiCaprio. So like every single movie that has Martin Scorsese's name on it, it's definitely a big thing. When you throw in like a Daniel Day-Lewis as one of his big roles in the movie, it definitely makes waves. And then introducing the Leonardo DiCaprio into this first teaming up of director and actor, it definitely makes waves. However, I did not see this movie upon its original release, and I don't think I saw it till much later on DVD or maybe a movie channel of some sort. This would probably be my 3rd or 4th time watching this movie, but technically it's probably only my 2nd time watching from start to finish, as its length is sometimes a little difficult to sit through all in one sitting. And like I'd already mentioned, not only does this movie star Leonardo DiCaprio, but it also stars Daniel Day-Lewis, Cameron Diaz, Liam Neeson, Jim Broadbent, And Brendan Gleeson. Amsterdam Valen, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, is a young Irish immigrant released from prison. He returns to the Five Points, seeking revenge against his father's killer, William the Butcher Cutting, played by Daniel Day-Lewis, a powerful anti-immigrant gang leader. He knows that revenge can only be attained by infiltrating Cutting's inner circle. Amsterdam's journey becomes a fight of personal survival and to find a place for the Irish people in the 1860s New York. So this movie is gloriously gory. From the opening sequence, which is a battlefield of one-on-one melee fighting and whatnot, is just so fantastic to see. I will admit that, right, Liam Neeson is in this when you hear his voice before you actually see him at the very beginning, who basically, his tragic death sets the whole entire future for his son, Amsterdam. So while he did see the prospects of using him, it was a bit of a unusual maneuver for Martin Scorsese to get Leonardo DiCaprio to play this much of a heavy, dark character, which is at the time is stuff that Leonardo was not doing. But to team him up with his adversary of Daniel Day-Lewis, who, again, this is probably the fourth or fifth movie that has Daniel Day-Lewis in it, and always does a spectacular job. I mean, that goes without saying, it's Daniel Day-Lewis. But the understated role that of Cameron Diaz as Jenny Everdeen is so remarkably refreshing to see. And again, at the time, it's something that Cameron Diaz did not do. She actually didn't do a lot of this sort of acting, which is kind of sad because she puts in a fantastic performance. Now, we are dealing with American actors doing foreign accents, so sometimes it gets a little wonky and whatnot. But at the core of this movie, it's such a fantastic exploration of, at the time, something that I myself did not know about. I mean, I knew about the race riots that went on and whatnot, the hatred towards the newly freed slave black men and whatnot, but this movie brings it to the forefront. This makes you have to look at this, and it is grotesquely violent, but in such a dramatically cinematic way that you can't look away. And again, we're dealing with the creme de la creme. This is Martin Scorsese. This is Daniel Day-Lewis, Leonardo DiCaprio, and the rest of the supporting cast, which don't even they don't come close to being spoken about in the beginning of this thing. That just the amazing character actors that Martin Scorsese brings together, and how fantastic of a performance he gets from even the smallest little thing. We got some fantastic pyrotechnics and all that sort of thing. There's explosions. We got some fabulous splurting blood and whatnot. And so it is a wonderful movie that does not seem its length at all. And it's on July 13th, 1863, that the New York draft riots break out. And as the two gangs converge on Paradise Square for a showdown, the U.S. Navy actually opens up with cannon fire. Amsterdam and Butcher try to fight in the dust throw up by the cannon fire, but Butcher is killed by a piece of shrapnel. And this happens about 2 hours and 22 minutes into this 2 hour and 47-minute movie. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that particular season, it actually ended up being nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Art Direction, Best Original Song, Best Actor for Daniel Day-Lewis, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Editing, Best Sound, and Best Original Screenplay. And as it is the 14th of July, we are going to be watching Fair Game from 2010, directed by Doug Liman and starring Naomi Watts. So to begin with, before we actually get into my knowledge of this movie, looking up this movie, there are a few movies that have this title, and none of them, while they all are called Fair Game, They have nothing to do with each other. There are a very wide range of different versions. But when I saw the poster for this particular movie, it sparked a bit of a memory. And I think this is a movie that I probably saw when it was released on DVD, because at the time when it was released, I was more than likely working as an assistant manager at Blockbuster. So that is more than likely the reason why I ended up seeing this movie, because I definitely did not see it in the theaters because of its real world political situation that I don't have that much of an interest in to begin with. And like I'd already mentioned, not only does this movie star Naomi Watts, but it also stars Sean Penn, Noah Emmerich, Ty Burrell, Sam Shepard, and Bruce McGill. Wife and mother Valerie Plame, played by Naomi Watts, has a double life as a CIA operative, hiding her vocation from family and friends. Her husband, Joseph Wilson, played by Sean Penn, writes a controversial article in the New York Times, refuting stories about the sales of enriched uranium to Iraq. Then Valerie's secret world and work and identity is leaked to the press, and with her cover blown and other people endangered, Valerie's career and personal life begins to unravel. So to begin with, Naomi Watts and Sean Penn do a spectacular job. They're very intense at this very dramatic storytelling of true events, which is kind of an interesting little device that this movie takes on. Constantly mentioning actual political names in the here and now of the movie itself and how they deal with it and whatnot. The movie actually, at the very end, coming up to Naomi Watts sitting down to make her statement in front of the press, as it cuts to actual news footage of the Valerie Plame making the statements. Now, it has an interesting feel and look to it of a late 2010s movie and whatnot. Sorry, an early 2010s movie where it's a lot of handheld and it's a lot of movement in the camera, which was the thing at the time. However, there are certain shots within the scene where we are definitely dealing with like a two-person shot, for example, where the camera moves a little thing. But then when we do a close-up of a person, it looks like they've just taken the far back shot and zoomed in, so the tiny little movements look a little more movement, I guess, is a way to say it. But yeah, it's an interesting look. It has a very realistic look to it. There's no bright colors, there's no spectacular shots and scenery and all that. While it does go to interesting places within the world, there is no spectacle to this movie, because it's not the spectacle of the movie what it is. It's the dramatic story that plays out with the enriched materials, nuclear weapons, the falsehood put forward by the government and whatnot, and it just snowballs into this actual story. So it's when Vice President Cheney's chief of staff violates the law and leaks Valerie Plume's connection. An article that names her as a CIA agent appears on July 14th, 2003, which is about an hour into this 1 hour and 48-minute movie. And as it is the 15th of July, we are going to be watching Romeo and Juliet from 1968, directed by Franco Zeffirelli and starring Leonard Whiting. So out of the many interpretations of the Shakespearean play of Romeo and Juliet, this is probably one of two that most people would actually recognize as the definitive version of it. There would be the later on Baz Luhrmann from the late 90s with Leonardo DiCaprio, but this would be the other one that other people would recognize as the version that is most well known. This would be my first one that I had seen of pretty much any version of Romeo and Juliet, and to go, if memory serves me correctly, I actually watched this when I was in summer school for English one year when we did some Shakespeare, and the teacher at near the end of the month of classes showed us this movie, which was quite interesting to see the basically amount of nudity that was in this movie compared to what we had expected to be seeing. That being said, not only does this movie star Leonard Whiting, but it also stars Olivia Hussey, John McHenry, Milo O'Shea, Pat Haywood, Robert Stevens, Michael York, and Bruce Robinson. In the city of Verona, the Montagues and the Capulet families are perpetually feuding, with Romeo, played by Leonard Whiting, a handsome young Montague, disregards convention by attending a Capulet ball. He falls in love with the beautiful Juliet, played by Olivia Hussey, a Capulet. After a brief courtship, the two elope, creating even greater tension between the families. So this movie itself not only is visually stunning to watch because of the fact that it's actually filmed on location and there are no sets. They actually use interiors of existing buildings and whatnot where they're filming, which is fantastic. But something that rarely gets done for this particular story to begin with is your lead youthful roles are actually portrayed by actors that are very similar to the ages of the characters themselves. Now it is Shakespeare, so it is all the big long monologues and asides and fancy wordship play, which is fun to watch when you see on screen the actors basically striving to that role. And again, when you're dealing with a story, you definitely have theatrical actors to pull this role off in a very convincing manner. This probably would have been my first Olivia Hussey film that I saw. At the time, the next time I saw her was probably would have been very shortly after that when I saw her in Black Christmas, which is the movie that I really grew to enjoy her work and all that. The costumes in this movie are just so fun. They're so colorful. They're so over the theatrical Shakespearean, which is great to see. The fight sequences are really cool. We were dealing with a lot of action going on in the particular scenes where it does. And again, it's the same script. It's the same story. We know basically how this movie turns out. And this is an enjoyable ride to follow along this journey. There are other versions that tell the story a little differently or try and package it in a different box and just doesn't seem to be as fulfilling as, in my opinion, this particular version. Now, we don't actually have an actual year that this movie takes place in, but we do know that the date is July 15th, and that is basically the first hour of this whole entire movie. From start to about almost the hour mark is taking place all in one day, which is the 15th of July, to almost forget that the movie itself is a 2-hour and 18-minute movie. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that particular season, it actually ended up winning for Best Cinematography and Best Costume Design, and it got nominated for Best Picture and Best Director. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this particular episode and look off into the future to see what we're going to be watching for tomorrow, which is the 16th of July, and that is going to be Sarah's Key from 2010. So until next time, go see a movie. This has been A Year of Movies, a Planet Geek production. Please be sure to subscribe, download, comment, share, rate, and review. Once again, another thanks to Ivan Walters for his book, A Year of Movies, 365 films to watch on the day they happened. Look for it online or at your local bookstore. Follow Planet Geek Productions on all of our social media. Through Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, and Letterboxd, search for Planet Geek Productions. On X, former Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky, search for Planet Geek Pod. You can also reach out to us through email at planetgeekpod@gmail.com. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and until next time, go see a movie.